Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Normie American Conservatism live stream, where we lament the passing of a great political movement for freedom and justice in this world that sadly seems to be on the way out. But to discuss it this evening, I have Ghost of Buckley.
Hello there. Ghost of Buckley. I'm here to say that Joseph McCarthy did absolutely nothing wrong except lose.
And Granger.
Hello, and I'm here to say that Ron Paul did nothing wrong and that Trump killed Reagan.
He stole his campaign slogan, literally. And also Normie.
Hi there, I'm Normie Gardner, and I'm just a frog with a guitar.
And I am Benjamin McLean, the dictator who is going to take over the government and force it to pretty much leave everybody alone.
That sounds awful.
You tyrant!
Get out, you filthy libertarian.
I'm just, I don't know. I guess I didn't really think through what I was going to say. I just had to come up with something. So then the first question I think we have to discuss then is what is this conservatism we've come here to talk about tonight? And I don't think I'll say what I think first. I think I'll let you all start. Who wants to go first?
I could start first.
Oh, sure. Go on, Normie.
Okay, so I think before we say conservatives, we have to clarify it more, as you guys all know. I mean, conservatism in Britain or in Spain means different than conservatism in America. Generally speaking, conservatism means you conserve things in the past. So a royalist would be a conservative in Britain, but in America, it would be a conservating of the ideals of the founding fathers and of limited government. That's what we conserve in America. And I think that's a big and obvious thing that's often not understood by people who aren't American. It's like, this is what conservatism is here in America. And people just don't seem to get that.
That's true, but in some ways, though the loyalists would have seen the American rebels in the American Revolution as rebels and radicals, their own writings indicated that the founding fathers were trying to conserve and preserve the principles of English liberty from the Magna Carta.
Exactly.
And I would say that were trying to, when they were trying to create something new, they were drawing on some very good work from the distant past, things like the work of John Calvin and the Puritans, and also even further back to Aristotle. So they based their republic on the Roman Republic. That's when you look at all these diverse sources that the founding fathers drew on, which were mostly ancient Greek pagan and Roman pagan and the Protestant, especially the Calvinist direction of Protestantism. You find that in that is what the founding fathers were really inspired by, and not all these very radical Enlightenment ideals that seized control in the continent of Europe.
Well, there was some of both going on there. Many of the founding fathers were Enlightenment thinkers in many ways, but they didn't believe in the extreme radicalism that we saw later in the French Revolution, and those founding fathers who had initially supported the French Revolution kind of learned the error of their ways as it turned so awful.
I think what distinguishes American conservatism and the founding fathers' conservatism is the degree of moderation it had, of realism. It didn't try to transform human nature. It was very
moderation. Moderation is a principle of American conservatism that goes all the way back to the earlier British conservatism that would have been the ideals of America's friend Edmund Burke in Parliament.
Oh yes, the Burkean conservatism is very much a huge part of what we would call American conservatism.
And how would you sum that up? The Burkean conservatism.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
that's one way to that's one way to put it. Another way is how Burke believed in progress, but he wasn't this Whigian that believed in just this we're going down the wide range of history. It's going to become better and better with progressive change. It was more like we need to have a solid foundation if we're going to make society for what things are, if we're going to make society what it is. And he was probably more conservative than a lot of the founding fathers, because he would have liked it better if George Washington crowned himself a king and created a national American church.
I think a lot of the revolutionaries would have preferred that. But just one moment, please. I've got to open my drink here. I'm having a soda. I don't actually drink.
You drink soda though. I have a quote from Thomas Jefferson on the Declaration of Independence. Can I read it?
Sure.
Okay. He says, "This was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, not merely to say things which have never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject, in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we are compelled to take, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular previous writing. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion." So that's particularly interesting to me because Thomas Jefferson, within the range of the founding fathers, with the exception of maybe Thomas Paine, was certainly more closer to ideological, and he was more originally he had supported the French Revolution, so he was more on the Enlightenment end of the spectrum as far as the founding fathers are concerned, and even he is here basically saying that he wasn't trying to write down the Declaration of the Rights of Man kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that it's funny. I think a lot of the reason the success of the American Republic was because by necessity they needed to be moderate. They needed to adopt the moderation. They had to incorporate different churches, different different beliefs of all different kinds, and reunite a really widely disparate group of people. And that's always been
I don't really think that they had to. This is where I would have to disagree with you, because I don't think that the people who were united, they might have had their differences, them being a Protestant and Catholic and sort of deistic, but they all had
were 11 Protestant colonies, one crazy colony, Rhode Island, and one Catholic colony, Maryland.
Yep. What do you mean by Rhode Island being crazy specifically?
Well, Rhode Island was basically populated by contrarians who didn't have any,
Williams.
Yeah, Roger Williams, who didn't have any particular state church, but was all about non-sectarian liberty.
I remember the best quote from my Baptist education on I think Roger Williams. He was the founder, right, of Rhode Island.
I believe so.
It was that the ideal church in his mind would have consisted of him and his wife, and of her he wasn't too certain.
I might say though, let's make sure we don't spend too much time just on American history here.
Yes.
To try to bring us to our subject though, before a certain period in the 20th century, most of what we have said here wasn't controversial. It was just the American national philosophy, and both parties agreed on it in the main, and only disagreed on details about how best to implement and pursue it. But in the 1950s, we started to see it was well there by the 1950s, but it was in the 1950s that we see the beginnings of what we would call conservatism today. American conservatism in the partisan political sense doesn't go back before the 1950s.
I would agree with that, yes.
Because before the 1950s, it wasn't political. I mean, it wasn't partisan. It was political, but it wasn't partisan. It wasn't one party believed this and the other party didn't.
I think I slightly disagree there, just because I'm thinking about the progressive movement, starting with Woodrow Wilson much earlier. I think that, obviously it's a gradual thing, but I think anti-conservatism or a contempt for the Declaration start with Woodrow Wilson, and with the progressive movement of like the 1910s, and which led to prohibition. I mean, obviously there's. I'm generalizing, but there's that strain of thought that starts back then with Woodrow Wilson.
I would. Well, I don't.
Well, I think that Wilson still. Well, actually, I don't know about Wilson. I know that the Democrats and Republicans both, in the early parts of the 20th century, would have both described themselves as American patriots who believed in the ideals of the founding fathers. Both parties would have said that.
I think that Woodrow Wilson was actually the first president to explicitly state that he was against that he had these really serious criticisms of the founding fathers, and he was our first progressive president.
I know that not all of the progressives of that era were that extreme, though, and
that is
progressivism true. Wasn't simply Marxism. Like today's progressives are simply Marxists.
Yeah,
but the earlier forms of progressivism weren't quite as extreme. I mean, they had the myth of progress, so the seed was there, but the plant hadn't really fully grown yet.
Exactly. It's gradual. And think it's like the ugly flowers kind of come full flower just recently.
I think the reason what happened was after. I think FDR was a huge factor because in the formation of conservatism, because early conservatism, what we would now call like paleo conservatism, started out as just the team that was opposed to the New Deal. You had a bunch of Rockefeller Republican, because before, like in the 1950s era, you had quite a few people called Rockefeller Republicans, and they were mainly Northern Republicans that supported the New Deal, and they were distinguished from Republicans that were against the New Deal, and these were like the Barry Goldwater types and the paleoconservative types, and then with the rise of William F. Buckley and National Review came what you would call fusionism, which reached its pinnacle with Ronald Reagan's presidency.
Yeah. Now, I would say that the thing about the New Deal is, however much we may dislike the New Deal, it's important to remember that the New Deal had many, many supporters who were very moderate people. All right. The New Deal, I wouldn't describe the New Deal as simply a Marxist project. The Marxists would like to grab hold of it and push it as far as it could go, but it wasn't simply a Marxist project. Many of the people who supported the New Deal would have been very conservative in a lot of other ways. a lot of them wouldn't have put up with divorce, for instance.
Oh, definitely. I would say this about say what you want about FDR, but during his office, one of the social programs he tried to do, and he implemented was that he tried to help have programs to help working fathers raise their families. Of course, that was undone by feminism's gender pay equality movement, which got rid of helping dads, because of course we can't help dads, or else women aren't equal or something.
I would like to dissent on a couple of points here. First of all, I think you're painting the American consensus, a little bit with rose-colored glasses. I mean, there was the inhumanity we've seen in the last 60 years, 70 years from since the sexual revolution is unspeakable. And pretty much everyone in the world before that would have been in consensus against those things.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Right. But there wasn't, I mean, people in the stream are saying Woodrow Wilson was the first progressive president, or FDR was the first progressive president. Lincoln tore the country in half. I mean, slavery was wrong. I'm glad it's gone. But declaring war on half the country preemptively is a massive violation of the original principle of government by consent of the governed.
I don't think going back to the 19th century is going to be helpful here.
Right.
I don't agree with your account of Lincoln at all.
Okay, well, fine. Well, how about this? How about this? There were differences There were differences at the founding. Those differences continued through the beginnings of America and right up until the time that we're talking about. And they became more pronounced as communism became a bigger thing, and as World War II changed America and the world. Then the differences became more pronounced. Another thing I'd add into that is something I got from Missing the Mark. He did a video called "History is Safe Because It's Over." So you're looking back at a lot of these things that could have been just as dangerous. I mean, the Red Scare responded to something. So in the 1920s, there could have been a communist infiltration, but they never came to be. They never came to be because they were stopped. So now we look back at it and we don't think it's that bad. We were only worried about the sexual revolution because that's the one that took hold. The other ones could have been just as bad. I mean, if the South had won the war, and if the slavery hadn't been abolished, we'd all be talking about how to get rid of slavery right now. So
I don't think how to get rid of abortion.
I think if the South had won the war, there'd be like 50 different countries right now, to be honest. But let me just add this in, because I think we could go on a whole different podcast about the Civil War. I disagree strongly. I think there's lots of misconceptions about Lincoln. I think that me and Ben would probably be in more agreement. But I think one thing that'll be useful to step back and say, like, because the circumstances obviously change from generation to generation. So what links the spirit of conservatism together, I think, is just that's as simple as sticking to the original as much as possible founding principles, like federalism, for example. I mean, that's true for conservatives in the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s up till recently, at least,
that's, sure, the entire basis of the movement against the New Deal that predated partisan conservatism was based off of that. They believe those sort of pre-conservatives, paleocons, believed that the New Deal was something that was a grave threat to the idea of the American founding ideals.
Yeah, I'd probably call them proto-conservatives. I mean, they were conservative in a sense, but when we talk about American conservatism, though, we're really talking about something that was an invention of the 1950s. And when leftists, who, especially ones who are maybe not deeply educated on American political history, hear conservatives talking about the founding fathers and so forth, they assume that conservatives are claiming some kind of clear, continuous political succession that would tell you exactly who you should have voted for in every single election from from Washington to the present day, in just one continuous political ideology, and that's not what conservatism is.
Right.
Yeah.
Conservatism is trying to preserve a range of ideas that were the only choices back in the 19th century. For much of the 19th century, both choices would have been what we'd call conservative now.
Hey,
But
can
conservatism has to take those things and bring them forward into the present.
So,
Yeah.
guys, I'm looking at the chat, and I found a funny comment that really sticks out to me as something I wanted to really discuss. So, it was with somebody. Some account said, "What's this all about?" This is normies discussing your grandfather's political opinions. No, so that's what I wanted to really delve into, is that like this thing is dying now. This thing's like everyone think, "Oh, this is just so lame. What federalism, whatever, dude." It's like it's not the new hotness anymore. And that's what's really sad to me, is that because this is what inspired me to get into politics, and the death of this, or what I see as like the dying of it, is what inspired me to withdraw from politics. I used to be really into politics like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. But now I barely pay attention because I'm just so sad. Because it's like, that's gone now. Now it's all just alt-right versus Trump, it feels like to me, and everyone's like, or not left-wing versus Trump, I should say. Like, just like, it just seems so.
Well, the problem with Trump is that he's practically defined as.
Well,
just
guys, before we get to that, I think we really need to talk about first about Buckley, and then about the 1960s, and then why do
we need to? But why do we need to go through this huge history of conservatism?
Well, can we jump in and attack what this guy said? Because that's probably
what is conservatism is the question we started with.
Yeah, I get you.
For me, conservatism in a lot of ways is what we've been talking about, and it's also the particular partisan conservatism with the 1950s is Buckley-style fusionism. It's the combination of social conservatism concerns with this free market principles that drove.
I would see Buckley and National Review as creating a political force, a united political force out of several desperate factions, which without Buckley and National Review, we might not have seen turn into one coherent movement. And the thing to understand about all these forces is they were all anti-communist.
Oh yes, definitely. That was their number one uniting factor.
But there's also people he expelled as well. The people that he got rid of.
Yes, that's part of what's important to talk about this, because what we're trying to do here, we're trying to distinguish for people who are younger and may not have followed politics as long. Our goal here is to get to distinguishing Buckley conservatism from the alt-right, so that by the time somebody gets to the end of this podcast or live stream, they understand the difference between classic Buckley conservatism and the alt-right.
But I think
why the alt-right is alt.
Well, the problem with that is like, okay, first of all, I don't think anybody except like the leftists are going to be confused on the difference between the alt-right and Buckley conservatism. I mean, the alt-right certainly.
Dude, there are people who are totally confused about that right now. I am telling you. I know those of us who are on this live stream, I know we're all political junkies, so we know the background on this. But I am running into people, even people who think of themselves as as conservatives, who aren't really clear on this. There's people who will call themselves alt-right, but they will then start quoting Martin Luther King's ideas on race.
Can there's
That's
going to be
alt-right.
some overlap, though. I mean, the alt-right is an umbrella term, and it's used in two different ways. One time it's used to disparage anybody who's to the left of or to the right of BuzzFeed, and then other times it's used to actually mean Richard Spencer. So there's that. And then there's the fact that there's a bunch of kids that come online, they're 16, they go on 4chan the first time, and they're like, oh my God, you know, Pepe is the founder of American conservatism or something. And
Pepe's just my cousin.
he's your cousin. Does he play the guitar?
We call those invalids, says Mauritian Struggle.
We call those invalids, yes.
Yeah.
The point is that there is some overlap. There's some overlap in the general ideas, partly because the left has pushed things so far that to be against the left is to be counter-revolutionary, opens the door then to real regress in a certain sense, or to go completely in the, you know, if I say we got to have international socialism, somebody else can stand up and say we have to have national socialism or something like that.
Right. Well, this is why it's relevant to talk about Buckley and what Buckley did.
Yeah.
There were several factions that were around. You mentioned the social conservatives. The social conservatives are concerned about the moral degradation of society, especially as concerns sex, and how we can try to keep the young people in the system of getting married and having babies and not sleeping around in order to keep good social order, so that children continue to grow up with all the advantages of strong families, and then the families retain their wealth and so on, and people maintain their piety and so forth. So the churches and all the social good that the churches do keep going. And so social conservatives are trying to conserve all of that. And then you had the people who are very concerned about communism from a national security standpoint. And, you know, those people may have had a lot of opinions on a lot of other stuff that, you know, who knows where they'd fall on any other issue. But there were people who made America needs to beat the Russians as their number one issue. And so they're anti-communist from that perspective. They'd be called hawks, especially as concerns Korea and Vietnam. They'd be called hawks. And so that's another faction that Buckley got hold of. And then there were varying degrees of libertarianism that Buckley brought in.
But not ANCAPs.
Yeah, but not ANCAPs.
I think there was like a few ANCAPs, but they were like they weren't crazy.
Here's the thing about what Buckley did. By deciding some people would get to write and would get positive reviews from National Review magazine, and some people wouldn't, based on their political stances. And certain people who had more extreme political stances weren't allowed on National Review. And as a result, they found themselves kind of on the outs of the conservative movement because they wouldn't get talked about in its most prestigious, most read publication. And so Buckley was able to keep the actual honest-to-God racists out of the conservative movement. And he did this very intentionally and deliberately and sneakily.
I think he also was also motivated by his faith too.
That as well. I think it was but I wasn't talking about his motivations. I was just talking about his
he was very shrewd. Very shrewd.
And that helped make conservatism more politically powerful because of that, and made it last through the generations, because when the civil rights movement became part of the American consensus, which it did.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. That was actually a very radical I think of all the things that happened in American history, the civil rights movement is probably what really defined what defines most of modern politics in America.
So, Mauritian struggle put down the same conservatism which made abortion legal, which I don't really understand why he would say that, because that seems like
Reagan.
Reagan didn't make abortion. The Supreme Court made abortion legal.
No, but in California, didn't he loosen it up a little bit?
Yeah, Reagan
And
did some
Goldwater
things.
wasn't exactly pro-life.
Reagan did some things in as governor of California that weren't very good. I mean that's certainly true.
I mean, it's a good thing we're talking about
We
a movement,
talked
not
about
a person.
paleoconservatism already. You'll have to go back in the stream, Mister. But anyway, I need to quit watching this. I need to quit watching the chat for a second.
Mauritian is claiming Roe v. Wade is what helped how conservatives supported abortion, and no, that's not true. Mauritian, the best way to, I think one way that Reagan did, I think inadvertently helped the abortion cause was nominating Anthony Kennedy to the Supreme Court, because they thought Anthony Kennedy was a conservative when in fact he was a raging progressive lunatic.
Can we be fair and mention that Goldwater was pro-choice? I mean, it was 73 was 10 years after he ran for the presidency.
Yeah, but the thing is that this is the thing. Okay, we're talking about a movement and principles, not about this is what I think the problem with Trump is, that we think Trump equals conservatism, or Reagan equals conservatism, or Goldwater equals conservatives. That's not really the truth at all. I think it's a much more interesting question to talk about the Supreme Court and how it was taken over by progressives and kind of overrode federalism and constitutional order by
that started with started with FDR, and FDR it got started with the progressive movement, and then started taking off with FDR. And pretty soon, you had, and then with the sexual revolution and all these progressive movements in the '90s, you had all the,
Yeah, well, I said we ought to stop reading the chat because the chat keeps wanting to have us jump all over the place, and we ought to try to keep some level of order here. Now, I was saying that Buckley kept the actual honest-to-God racists out of the conservative movement, which gave the conservative movement staying power in an America that absolutely adopted Dr. King's ideals after Dr. King's assassination.
I have this rant I want to go on, and I don't know where to put this. I really want to push back against what that guy said about, your grandfather, discussing your grandfather's political opinions.
Well, I do political philosophy. I don't do elections. I mean, well, I guess I did live stream the debates, but I don't do campaigning for particular candidates. I do political philosophy, and there's a lot of history in political philosophy.
Right, obviously, but I think, so somebody, they're watching this right now, and they don't, again, they're not political junkies. They're probably not political and history junkies. So they're looking at the problems that the West is facing right now, and they're thinking, how does this dead white guy help solve any of that problems? And there are answers to those questions, and I think, unfortunately, yet we're not getting to that. Now, if you want to draw this out a little farther, and I don't want to get in your way, but I would like to present some facts or present some ideas about that.
Okay. Well, I was hoping that we're getting there.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Let's continue with the history lesson. Come on, Ben.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The second thing.
Tell those alt-righters in the chat to stop being degenerates and to pay attention, because we're going to do some history.
The second thing that Buckley kept out of conservatism was Ayn Rand and the really hardcore libertarianism, because that was just way too extreme for conservatism to get the staying power and mainstream appeal that it needed.
I think Ayn Rand was too radical for Rothbard, or
Well, Rothbard and Rand had very different views. I mean, but one of the Rand was a lot more statist and anti-religion than Rothbard.
Well,
That's right.
yeah, he was much for anti-religion. I think that National Review at the time, I can't remember the guy who wrote it, the famous Whittaker Chambers. He would say that Rand
Big Sister is watching you.
Yeah, anti-human.
That is a key moment.
Go. Yeah, that's what he said.
Yes, that paper, that review, Big Sister is Watching You by Whittaker Chambers, is a key moment in the formation of American conservatism. By kicking out the Randites, conservatism became something that was more palatable to the mainstream and made it possible to elect Reagan and made it possible for basically the conservatives to take over the Republican Party. Because before that, the conservatives were just sort of one of the forces in the Republican Party. But by the time Buckley and company were through, conservatism was the platform of the Republican Party. And the two things, republicanism and conservatism, in much of the country's mind became almost synonymous.
So if a alt-right person is watching this right now, they're thinking, okay, great. So conservatism took over the Republican Party in the 80s. What did that accomplish? Well, first of all, we didn't get nuked to death. That's a huge accomplishment. The party didn't get the Republican Party, which is half of the political establishment of the country, didn't get run by the Rockefeller Republicans, who were much more liberal. I go back and watch Pat Buchanan's Culture War speech. I mean, that was on the convention floor, and he was laying out social conservatism as about as clearly as you possibly could. I mean, he'd make Rick Santorum blush today. So the point is that, yeah, there's a lot of, that doesn't solve the illegal immigration problem that we're having now. It doesn't solve the Muslim takeover of Europe or whatever. But this pushback, Reagan solved the problems that faced Reagan. He didn't solve our problems. That's for us to solve. But he solved the problem that faced them. And America had an economic resurgence in of itself is a huge victory after the malaise of the 70s. So.
Oh, right. And one of the things to point out about fusionist conservatism is the main fusion is between the social conservative ideas and the fiscal conservative ideas. And the fiscal conservative ideas, without Buckley and National Review, there's no particular reason why in political philosophy those two ideas would go together. And the libertarian people who are both socially and fiscally libertarian demonstrate that.
Well, I mean, when FDR starts pushing it as far as he did, then people who are socially conservative, who are moderately on fiscal matters, who just believe in things like we ought to have balanced budgets and the government shouldn't continually expand for no sensible reason, then they become fiscal conservatives. So
definitely. That's what the proto-conservatives. That's why libertarians were in the proto-conservative camp at all. It was because of they were united with conservatism by an opposition to New Deal Democrats and also to communism, because you see, communism was such a huge threat that it pretty much endangered everybody, from the capitalists, the national security war hawks, or the neocons, if you will, and the social conservatives, each in their own different way.
And that's another thing.
I'm not sure if you guys have really grasped what I'm saying here, though. Maybe you have, but let me know if you have. If I maybe try to say it another way, what I'm saying,
think I got it, yeah.
Given that someone is a Christian who cares about marriage and family and decency in society, given that, it doesn't necessarily follow that they're going to be, for example, against the expansion of the welfare state. I mean,
Yeah, I get what you're
I'm
saying.
not saying those stances are incompatible or anything, but I'm saying if that's all you know about somebody and you don't have
it's an accident.
50 or 60 years of political history, binding certain ideas together, then there's no particular reason why you would associate family values with lower taxes. Those two things don't automatically go together. It is an invention of the 1950s to put those two things together.
Then you're absolutely right. They won't put together. I just wanted to comment on how fortuitous that was. In the situation we see now, when the left has taken over so many institutions and cultural institutions and government, where the lack of the less influence on government actually coincides when the government is anti-social values. It's very fortunate that we have this aligning of views.
People. That's actually a good point, and this is why
thank you.
I read a lot. I read a lot of a Catholic author by the name of John Zmirak, and he talks about this. He says that conservatives, conservative Christians or any kind of conservative really that opposes religious freedom is just kidding themselves, because they're just asking to be repressed by a radical secular leftist government. If they oppose religious freedom, then they have no way to they have no reason to oppose the repression of their particular group, because they would do the same to the opposite side. Now, and then he also pointed out that if you have religious freedom without economic freedom and political freedom, then that's not then you can't really have religious freedom. So that's how it might have been an accident that those two things came together, social conservatism and free market principles, but I think it is a fortuitous accident that they came together, because they can work very well in this. They still work very well in this current age.
Now, sorry.
Just one more comment on that. Where just these forces came into, as you Ben pointed out, they came into alignment in opposition to communism. And I just want to point out to the audience, guys, how much has really changed. I mean, it's not like the left is not communist in its core. It doesn't have. It's another branch of the same tree.
I think the subsequent decades have shown that in his basic premise that leftists were infiltrating American institutions, McCarthy was absolutely right. Maybe he wasn't right about all the names on his list, though he was about Alger Hiss. But maybe he wasn't right about all the names on his list. And it certainly was totally absurd for the House Un-American Activities Committee to be accusing Lucille Ball, of all people. But, they went completely overboard with the witch hunting. That's certainly true. But at the same time, it was also true that radical leftists were infiltrating American institutions, and everything that's happened since then has shown that is what actually occurred.
And so, therefore, why not keep the alignment, the coalition that we had that was the only thing effective in fighting this?
Here's the real challenge that I think we're facing right now. I don't think it's just the Trump administration taking over the Republican Party. I mean, we can come back from bad candidates. We've done it before. But what I see as the real challenge in the realm of political philosophy is the racialist alt-right taking the place of Christian social conservatism, and family values,
as if we could somehow substitute skin color for
when it comes to social issues,
right? For virtue.
That is what I see as a real threat to the things about conservatism that I value.
And it also goes hand in hand with what you were saying about Joe McCarthy earlier. So, like, in principle, he was right. There were communists infiltrating American institutions, and they're here now. But at the same time, there's also such a thing as an overreaction. People kind of tongue-in-cheek talk about it in the alt-right, the infamous purity spiral. But the fact of the matter is, America has never been an ethno-state. So when you start talking about creating an ethno-state in America, let's leave aside the fact that that's not conservative, but it's not going to work because
it would just be a really bad idea. But this is why the history is relevant, because at the same time, I'm also wanting to explain to leftists the history of the conservative movement, because it's important to understand why the conservative movement kicked out the racists and supported the civil rights movement, essentially. And
yes.
Here and see, that seems kind of perverse, because the civil rights movement was being led for the most part by a bunch of leftists. Now a lot of them were Republicans, but they were also leftists, because the parties hadn't quite aligned totally the way that they do now.
And the other thing is, if we need to reevaluate some of the elements of the civil rights movement, like the imposition on property rights with regards to the Civil Rights Act, or even how recently the Supreme Court curtailed the Voting Rights Act. It's safer to do that now because the underlying systematic racism issue has been settled. So now we can go back and look at
the Civil Rights Act was originally only intended to be a temporary measure.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That was the original plan. But here, I'd like to talk about, in terms of political philosophy, I think here Dr. King made a number of arguments that directly appeal to the political philosophy of conservatism, going back to the ancient traditions of the Christian West. And he does this very explicitly and intentionally. I have a particular passage here from a letter from Birmingham jail. Think about here, his audience that he's addressing here is conservatives. Think about that. Now, here's what he says. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance it may seem rather paradoxical for us to consciously break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law.
And that's the important thing, that King spoke the language of morality. And so the modern leftists today just want to burn down morality. And where horseshoe theory, if it exists, comes in, is the fact that the alt-right also, to a certain extent, sometimes speaks the language of morality, but the fear is that underlying that is a complete, again, disregard for morality and an attempt to burn it down.
Well, the problem
it's a term to disregard immorality. Like, listen to that quote from King. I can't think of anything more the polar opposite of Alinskyite power politics, where they appeal to natural law. That's the exact opposite of the amoral power politics of Alinsky, where everything's burned down to achieve a utopian vision, where he's appealing to natural law. Now, I'm sure somebody would say, "Oh, he wasn't sincere," but I don't see why he wasn't. It doesn't matter if he was sincere or not.
Doesn't
The
matter.
point is,
It doesn't matter because
that is the
we can be
opposition
sincere about it.
he
Exactly.
convinced American conservatives.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
that's
ever
the
since
opposite.
then,
Yeah.
that became American conservative dogma.
Yes. Natural law.
For
That's a good thing.
generations. Well, American conservatives already believed in natural law, but King's application of natural law to the race question became conservative dogma for generations.
He was bringing the idea forward. And that's really, I think, the important question. And I think Distributus, I don't know if Distributus really got to touch on it in his alt-right series, but the question isn't about IQ. It isn't the JQ. It's about what is the moral answer to these questions that we face. And that's more complicated than just those people look different than me and blood and soil. I'm not saying that soil and loyalty to nation and even loyalty to family and isn't important. But at the same time,
you have priorities,
right?
So
this is my problem with the alt-right is that they have the wrong priorities. Like you have nation and family and ethnicity. Those are loyalties that you have to have if you want to be a good Christian. But you have to put them in perspective. You can't just say these are the things that matter, and we can just kind of just paper over everything else.
It's what C.S. Lewis says in. I'll let you go, Normie. Sorry.
It's like one thing I made a video about it a couple months ago. I was watching some Brittany Pettibone video where she said, like, well, if you guys talking to conservatives, like, well, if you want to appeal to the founding fathers' principles, if you want to preserve those, you have to have white people doing it. You have to have white people in order to have the founding fathers' principles and have the moral law. And I was just like, no, you can't have both. Either you have the natural law or you have the blood and soil law. Like, they're diametrically opposed. You can't say all men are created equal, but only white men can believe that all men are created equal.
Here's the thing. Natural law theorists don't always agree about the content of the natural law. And
I agree.
Right, but they agree that there is a natural law.
They agree that there is a natural law, but they don't always agree about the content. Like, for example, I think that the natural law might permit the state to have some kind of artificial copyright protection, but I think that copyright is not part of the natural law. While the famous natural law theorist Lysander Spooner argues that copyright is part of the natural law. So different natural law theorists will argue about some aspects of the content of the natural law. None of them will say that rape or murder is permitted by the natural law, but there will be arguments, and race is one of the issues that those arguments have been about. So I'm not saying that King's view of the natural law is the only natural law view in the history of philosophy. But what I'm saying is King's view of the natural law, at least the basic outline of it, became conservative dogma for mainstream American conservatism from basically around the time of King's death until basically the fall of American conservatism that we're seeing now.
Well,
let's talk about the fall.
Okay. Oh yeah, let's talk about that fall. If I were to pick a time where mainstream conservatism began to fall, if you recall, the pinnacle of mainstream conservatism was Reagan's presidency, and I think another high point would have to be the Republican Revolution under Newt Gingrich during the Clinton years. Clinton did a lot of had a lot of bad laws passed, but the Republicans did have a lot of capital during that time too.
Yeah, we need to talk about Rush Limbaugh at some point in this.
Oh dear God!
Oh yes, Limbaugh. I mean, the rise of Rush Limbaugh was very big he was a part of this.
Any of us who lived
revolution
remembers what politics were like back then. Is going to know that Limbaugh, at least back then, was super relevant and influential to what conservatism became in the 90s.
I think
Yeah.
what started the downfall of conservatism was it started kind of with the fall of the Soviet Union, and without a common enemy, there was a lack of a common enemy to keep the different factions of the broad tent conservative movement together. And then you have
Limbaugh made the enemy the liberals.
Yeah, we made the enemy the liberals. Exactly.
That's what I'm saying was Limbaugh's contribution to conservatism was making the liberals the bad guys.
The feminazis.
Well,
that was his word. We need to remind the internet.
Yes, feminazi was Rush Limbaugh's word. And
exactly, yeah.
And
so however edgy you think you are, Rush Limbaugh beat you by what, 20 years?
oh hell yes. You think that Milo Yiannopoulos is edgy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've obviously never heard of a collar abortion.
I remember that. That's like when I was 16. I heard about that. Yeah.
You young whippersnappers, I need to tell you about what real conservative edginess looks like. Rush Limbaugh would, if he had a caller who was saying something that he didn't like, then what he would do is he would start to play a whole bunch of really lewd sound effects, like an abortion was being performed.
A vacuum cleaner and a scream is what he did.
A vacuum cleaner and a scream. And he'd say that the caller just got aborted.
Oh my God, I don't remember that one.
It was his way. It was his way of pointing out how horrible abortion was. I mean, he said that.
But he also used humor to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's
and Limbaugh's mantra was demonstrating absurdity by being absurd.
Yeah, he was a troll. Definitely.
And every great conservative comedian, you might say, since then, that's been their mantra. That is where Milo Yiannopoulos got most of his funniest ideas.
Definitely. The rest he got from just playing up how gay he was.
Yeah.
Anyway, the downfall of American conservatism has really three parts. The first part came during it was a long, arduous process over the course of the Bush years. Now, you say what you will about George Bush, but the ascendancy of the neoconservative and the rise of what Bush called compassionate conservatism, which was basically where the conservative movement would just disregard fiscal conservatism and support all these big government programs and spend a lot of money on wars overseas for democracy. That ruined a lot of people. It split people.
You guys, I want to say something to somebody in the chat. I'm not saying Rush Limbaugh is edgy now. I'm saying Rush Limbaugh was edgy in the early 90s. He's totally tame now.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's what people get these kids. The edginess it wears off, guys.
He's almost a completely different person now, and I you really ought to go back and look at some of his really early stuff, because it was fiery rhetoric stuff. I mean,
edginess is completely subjective. You shouldn't just have your
it was also the 90s. It wasn't the porn drenched 2010s. That's the other thing you have to remember. The things that people say as jokes now are an entirely different thing. I'd like to take a broader point.
I was going to.
Buckley do. Go ahead, Buckley. I think.
I'm sorry, but I was trying to. Yeah. Okay. The Bush's unpopularity plus his abandonment of fiscal conservatism.
Yes. And social conservatism too.
No,
and social security. It was more of his abandonment. He wasn't as socially conservative as some Republicans.
He wasn't all that socially conservative.
He was at a gay wedding. Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't all that socially conservative to begin with.
Right.
He didn't. Let's move on. His the left really smeared him, though. We can all agree that, and that
fucking assholes. I hated that.
they really
Fuck those guys. I still get pissed off.
I think, and that gave rise to Obama, and what Obama represented was basically a nightmare scenario for a lot of conservatives, because he was like the go-between guy between the Bill Clinton moderate Democrats and the SJW radicals. He was the bridge between that, and a lot of people noticed that, and this is why you had the overreaction in the form of the Tea Party. Now, the Tea Party movement.
The Tea Party was an overreaction.
Oh God. Well, it was, in some ways, it was a perfectly sane reaction. But
now we're going from history to current events, clicking closer, and so our emotions are getting higher.
That's true. That's true.
But I think one of the things that the Tea Party did that I did not like was it brought more and more of the radical libertarianism into conservatism. And
well, Glenn Beck did.
Glenn Beck definitely did.
Yeah,
so maybe we should talk about the Tea Party real quick, you guys.
Yeah, the Tea Party represented.
The Tea Party was the Trump voters before they knew they were Trump voters.
Well,
you might say that.
If Bush was an abandonment of fiscal conservatism, then the Tea Party movement was the abandonment of social conservatism.
No, not necessarily, because all the people in the Tea Party were social conservatives, and
They were.
I wouldn't say all.
A good part, though.
There were a couple of local Tea Party organizations that even had pro-life rallies.
Here's the thing,
they just didn't talk about it because
exactly, they did not emphasize it. And one of the things about Buckley-style conservatism is that they put equal emphasis on free markets and family values.
Yeah, exactly. None take precedence over the other.
Absolutely. That was part of the Fusionist Pact that Buckley and company formed in the 1950s, and the de-emphasis of family values. That was the end of that was the side of the pact that broke. The social conservatives never stopped being for liberty.
Right.
It was the libertarians who betrayed us.
Yes.
And
then they acted like the Republican Party was too socially conservative.
Not like it was theirs. The Republican Party was theirs and always had been theirs, which was just a denial of history.
Yeah, I disagree.
And
I think that the thing about and nowadays you can see that a lot of quote unquote millennial conservatives are pretty much libertarians that don't care about social conservatism at all, or really conservatism all that much, considering their view on corporations, and they have all this. Like, here's the thing. If you look at something like CPAC.
Well, hold on 1 second. Just before we get to CPAC, in the chat, Murikan Struggle says the libertarians betrayed us. His response is they never were us. What I meant wasn't that the libertarians were social conservatives before. What I meant was they're Republicans, and as Republicans, they betrayed the platform of the party.
Yeah, because the Buckley,
the Buckley Pact and the platform of the party.
But there was a reason why that happened, because Bush
thought they could get away with it.
Bush went before Obama. Bush had spent more money than all of the previous presidents combined. So I think Bush exploded the coalition, is what I think. And I think
definitely.
And then the different
was a combination of
things
things.
Come out. And the social conservatives don't have the marketing that social liberals do, and that's kind of how we ended up where we are.
Yeah, and part of it was, about the marketing. Let's get back to the marketing later. But part of it was the Iraq War.
Yes.
Conservatives were divided over the Iraq War.
We still are.
the anti-Bush, the anti-war conservatives didn't have very clear messaging at the time, though.
Yeah.
The anti-war side was almost entirely represented by those we'd now call SJWs. And as a result, I pretty much uncritically supported the Bush administration at the time.
No, wait.
No,
Even Buckley
I
himself
personally
said that the war wasn't a good idea. George Will said that the war. You can find them talking in 2004 or 5 about how the Iraq War was not conservative.
Well,
I'm saying, at the time, I was a high schooler and I didn't know who William F. Buckley was. All right.
Too.
And what I'm saying is, at the time, the anti-war argument was almost entirely coming from people who seemed to me to pretty much be SJWs.
Yes, that was true.
And that was the perception that was created by the media and by Fox News.
Yes.
And at the time, I was a young adult. I was in my early 20s, and at the time, it seemed to me like the anti-war and was driven by the left, and I viewed the people on the right who were anti-war not like with annoyance, because I thought, guys, we're in the middle of a war. Now's the time to argue, like, just win the war. That's what and I think that my opinion. I'm bringing that up my opinion because I think a lot of people had that impression as well, and the split started to happen.
We need to remember that this is post 9/11.
I guess it's also true that the libertarian, the Patriot Act made the liberty-minded folks real mad.
Yeah,
and I think maybe a lot of them kind of blamed social conservatives for that somehow. I don't think that really made sense, but
that's because they were listening to liberal online talking heads who said that if you oppose abortion, that's exactly the same as wanting the government to spy on your emails. I mean, what was that book by an American fascist, William Hedges or something, where he basically said that evangelicals were we're going to take it's where you get your theocratic conspiracy thing from, right, Ben?
Yeah, well, that's like the leftist.
I got that from crazy people in internet forums making unhinged rants about how evil American evangelicals are.
Right. But there were books published.
That might be where they got that idea from.
Yes.
But I got that idea from them, not from actually reading.
Oh, okay.
Guy, I think an interesting thing to discuss would be the topic of neocons. What are exactly neocons?
That's where I wanted to go next.
Let's do it.
At the time, I was so confused by this term neocon and paleocon.
Yeah.
And I did not understand that during the whole Bush administration. Of course, I was a high schooler, but I didn't understand what neocon meant. I heard people use it. I heard it on the news. No one would give me a clear definition. And I've gone all the way through college, and it was never discussed in college either, even in my political philosophy class. And so here is, though, the definition of a neocon that I'd say. A neocon is a conservative who supported the Iraq War, period. Is that accurate?
No.
I could see why you would say that. I would, but okay.
Neoconservatism has a very intellectual and political history, going back. The intellectual roots of neoconservatism it has ideas from Harry Kissinger and Leo Strauss and Bill the older Irving
Kristol.
Irving Kristol, yeah. Not
so
Bill Kristol, Irving Kristol, the dad.
Did they use the term themselves to describe their ideas, though?
Yes, they did.
Oh, I see.
Yes, they did.
We had to say this, though.
The neoconservative... Okay, what? Go on.
The neocon has now become basically like conservative. It's just become a slur. People yell at people. So
exactly, yeah.
Well, they ruined the movement, so...
The thing about the neoconservatism is that neoconservatives were the war hawks, the third part of the Buckley Pact. They were not super pro, although they were kind of free market. They were
anti-communist.
They were anti-communist.
They were idealists.
And although they were not super pro conservative values, although most of them were pro-life in some way, even if they didn't really weren't really rah for that. But neoconservatives, what defined them was they had this idea from Leo Strauss that you had to have like some kind of foreign enemy in order to have peace at home. That was a big deal for them because they wanted stability in terms of security, and you also had to. They also believed that you could spread democracy all over the world through these warfare, and this comes from like the post Cold War consensus, the idea post Cold War that mixed capitalism, democracy, and liberalism are going to just spread all over the world, and we'll have like a utopia that way.
Well,
but you're talking about
that'd be nice. I don't think it's likely, but it'd be nice.
Well, it's a very well. You have to understand that the neoconservative movement is made up mainly of people who used to be like radical, Democrats, radical. Some of them radical Trotskyites in their youth, and then because
they got pushed out of the Democratic Party by the New Left, and then a lot of them when they were Reagan Democrats, and then they came over to the Republicans.
And Buckley was a huge part. Buckley was actually a huge part in that. He was able to talk to these people because they were in the same social class as them, and he had
the Harvard accent.
Oh yeah. It was seriously. His way of talking brought them over to the Republican Party because they wanted to have this in this sort of intellectual veneer to the conservative movement.
And this would be why before 9/11. George W. Bush was identified with the establishment Republicans, including during the 2000 primary.
Oh, definitely. That's because
this is what we mean when we say establishment Republicans.
The neocons were the establishment by the time George Bush was running for office because
Buckley, one of the things you said, you said the neocons, like you said, like they said you had to have an enemy, you had to have war.
Well, you had to. That. Well, they had to. They wrote it down in all these different papers that you had to have some kind of foreign threat in order. I mean, Bush had this whole axis of evil speech where he said that
very accurately described 3 people as evil, though. I mean,
no. He described 3 people as evil, even though none of them had attacked us beforehand.
Afghanistan.
No. It was Iraq,
Iran, North Korea, and Iraq.
Yeah, and at that time, none of them had attacked us.
Still to this day, none of them have attacked us.
North Korea attacked us in the Korean War. They started it.
No, that's dumb.
No, it's the historical fact. North Korea did attack.
They didn't attack us,
and they have sold. You can again current events.
The point is, but that's because I'm convinced that if 9/11 hadn't have happened, Bush would have found some way to go get us into some kind of conflict with those with the axis of evil, because that was the ideology.
The Bush
of the
family does have a history there, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure we should be condemning people for actions that they might have taken in an alternate timeline. I just think that kind of establishes a bad precedent. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I totally agree. Maybe I would have gone too far, but I think that but the idea that they need the foreign war enemy to have peace at home does play a huge factor in the neoconservative idea, because neoconservatives want national security and security at home. at
This
all
was
costs.
always the faction of conservatism that I knew the least about, honestly.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, I think their political philosophy seems to be in a lot of ways a lot less interesting than the others. And
Well, that's
so
because
I never really looked into it as much.
Well, that's because they didn't really have that much opinions on domestic policies. They didn't really have.
They sold out.
I mean, they didn't really have like a strong conviction. They didn't have. They were super moderate on all these
Irving
free
Kristol,
markets and social conservatism.
Irving Kristol wrote an article in like the late '80s how we had already lost the culture war. So they didn't
by
care
the late
about
'80s.
that.
We probably had, yeah.
Well, saying we've lost doesn't mean we can't. No, this is gonna get into an argument with me and between you guys, obviously. And I remember this being so. I'm just gonna say that out loud. All I will say in this is that if they were trying to pick an enemy, they did a pretty good job since they picked the worst people in the world at that time to fight. I mean, Iraq war and the ISIS war, the same people, guys. So, like, I know everyone hates the Iraq war. Everyone thinks it's stupid. I'm just saying that the reason 1 million Iraqis died was because of the worst people in the world happened to be in that spot. So, yeah, you know, I mean, just.
But
as a
it's significant to say here that conservatism in general wasn't defined by its foreign policy other than its anti-communism.
Yeah, I agree.
Exactly, and that caused the end of the Cold War caused that they wanted to that's kind of why the neocons became more prominent. They wanted to replace
a foreign policy.
they wanted to have
that's true.
They wanted to have like a communist replacement plan.
Yeah,
the rest of the conservative movement really, in a lot of ways, had
moved on.
Or very little foreign policy. It just they were basically defaulted back to isolationism from before World War II.
It's also important to point out that what being a war hawk changed over time. And part of that was because the world changed. Yeah. When you have communism, being a little bit more hawkish means confronting the big bad guy on the other side of the world who is also actively being imperialist. But when that communist threat falls, and we go into this prolonged, I don't know what you would call it, detente of the 90s, then the neocons really kind of kicked it up a notch by looking for an enemy. And originally in the 90s, it was Bill Clinton trying to control things in Bosnia, and that didn't. And NATO got involved for some reason in Bosnia. But then after 9/11, that changed it again, because then there was the real substantial threat of terrorism threatening America. That changed the American mindset again, like Ben mentioned. Most conservatives, most Americans weren't hyper one way or the other on foreign policy, but they're certainly hyper about not getting attacked. So one thing for an alt-righter to look back and just say, well, this was all screwed up and we should have been more this way in the past because then we wouldn't have to deal with it here. It's the world changed. The whole question of what American foreign policy should be changed. The whole status of what it meant to be the lone superpower in the world changed. And you have to take that into account as you evaluate political movements through history.
Yeah, that as well. Now, Normie Gardner here in the chat has raised an issue I think we definitely need to segue into talking about here before we finish up, and that is what is populist, because this gets us into talking about Trump and the criticisms of Trump from conservatives.
Oh, definitely. I did not really vote for Donald Trump because I wasn't.
I didn't vote for him either.
I didn't vote for Trump, but I might
not
be
vote for Trump. I did not vote for Trump.
I voted for Bush twice. I even voted for McCain. I voted for Romney. I did not. I really had to hold my nose to vote for McCain. I had to hold my nose, maybe a little less, to vote for Romney because I'm a Latter-day Saint.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask why.
I never had to hold my nose to vote for anyone.
Romney doesn't.
I wouldn't. Trump was a bridge too far for me.
Yeah.
Romney was Romney. Well, I would say that if Romney was even less principled when it came to his policies than Trump was.
Yeah,
you know what? Here's the thing. I want to. This might be illuminative of what I'm going to say. I also would ticket conservative my entire adult life. I never had to hold my nose for any of them, and the reason why is I always made a simple calculation. This guy is more in line with my values than this guy. The only person who I really struggle to consider voting for, and in the end I just couldn't vote for him, was Trump. And the reason was that he wasn't conservative at all. I mean, like
Romney wasn't conservative either.
Romney had all the same
Romney
positions Obama had. He just said it differently.
Well,
So he was
Obama
more
was
conservative than
anti-gay marriage both times he stood for election.
Right, exactly. And Romney invented Obamacare. So
Romney
Romney
the
was
first state that had gay marriage.
Romney was weak on fiscal issues, that's for sure, and moderate on social issues.
He'd been pro-choice twice.
I would say that
Romney had to change his mind in order to run on abortion.
He was for gun control. He was for green energy.
Guys, I'm not a defender of Romney. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there was a fundamental difference with Trump.
Okay, but what fundamental difference? Trump was. I agree that Trump was didn't exactly have principles, but to say Romney was somehow more principled, I don't understand.
Romney was establishment.
There's a sense.
So he was more predictable.
Romney was establishment.
No, it's not. I wasn't have trouble with Romney because he was established and Trump wasn't. That wasn't the point. I could have voted. I wanted to vote for Rubio or for Ryan or someone who back then. I know they're established now, but
Romney was definitely not my favorite in the primary. That's for sure. But I was prepared to vote for Romney over Obama.
Yeah, it was like the thing is, it's like there's a sense that I get the sense that Trump doesn't have like any conservative principles that I would agree with. I mean, like that's not something that. And it's not even a knock on him. So like this guy isn't a conservative. I mean, I don't hate him, but he's not a conservative.
Well, Romney isn't a conservative either. Romney isn't really a conservative either. So
but the establishment Republican Party really isn't conservative either.
The thing about Romney is Romney moved right in order to grab the Republican base during the election. Yes, and he moved right on abortion and on Obamacare and on a host of issues. Romney had to move right in order to get Republican voters.
It was less about the candidate themselves, but the party's reaction to them. Because when Trump voted for Romney, we were like, okay, we're gonna go with Romney. For Trump, it was like this feverish enthusiasm. Like there was suddenly less about the principles, more about the guy. That's what really.
It was.
Yeah, that's what really.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Trump was doing was more based on style than on actual policies. I mean,
definitely
the thing about populism in American politics goes back to Andrew Jackson and the founding of the Democratic Party.
The Democratic.
Rather than having a single consistent political ideal, what you do is you say whatever is going to make you the most popular that week.
That's what populism is, saying what makes you the most popular that week.
And
that
seems to have long. It's more of a technique than a political stance.
Exactly.
And that seems to have been what has defined Trump's ascendancy.
But we also need to be fair, especially with Trump, because he's supposed to be anti-establishment. But I guess this is true of any populist candidate.
Been anti-establishment.
Well, he's definitely not part of the establishment. Whatever you say about him, as of right now, and when he ran, he is not part of the establishment.
To be honest, whether something is or is not establishment doesn't really interest me. I'm more concerned with the principles of the thing.
Right, but if the establishment as a whole is completely going to crush us and is just tightening the noose around our neck, the counter argument is, well, blow it up.
I don't think
but
Trump
that's pretty much what Trump.
Today's rebels, tomorrow's establishment. You win, and then all of a sudden you're the establishment, and then
I don't care about that, Gardner.
Okay.
Remember Distributus' last video on the alt-right where he explains how populism won't help them win, and he explains how even if you elect a Donald Trump, he's still in charge of the swamp, and the swamp is still in control.
Leftist.
Yes, that's the establishment. So again, even if you swap out, even if you throw whoever you want at the top, they don't suddenly become the establishment because you have the bureaucracy, and you have the media, and you have large corporations.
Oh yeah, this is actually something kind of interesting about Donald Trump. I think he was the the candidate Donald Trump becoming candidate of the Republican Party was the third thing that really the third point that really broke conservatism, because I think the when that happened, the Reagan coalition cracked cracked at the seams, and you had the Never Trumpers from the National Review Never Trumpers, and then you have the and then and then from Breitbart came the pro-Trump populists, and then you also had and then you had all these other factions that were basically conservatism cracked into anti-Trump and pro-Trump, and pro-Trump and somewhere in. And everybody was either in those two camps or somewhere in between.
Yeah,
and
but
nobody.
Principles, though, this division over Trump, I think, mostly lined up this way in terms of principles. The libertarians really started to dominate the Republican Party to the point that it's basically their party now, and that's what we're seeing at CPAC.
Wait, you mean the Gary Johnson libertarians, not the Ron Paul libertarians, right?
Sure. Libertarianism as a political philosophy is what now dominates the Republican Party, and that's what we saw at CPAC. That's why we have the I'm trying to get us to talking about CPAC now. That's why we have pro-gay at CPAC and no anti-gay at CPAC.
But we've been sliding that way for probably a decade and a half now.
Oh yes, yes. But it was. Here's the thing. It's a great article by lifesite.com called "Proud to be Conservative, Proud to be Transgender. CPAC is Transitioning." And in this article,
more ways than one.
So CPAC pretty much had the thing about the Beltway libertarians, as opposed to like the more radical Rothbardians, is that they would the kind of libertarians that are funded by the Koch brothers and run Cato Institute and Reason magazine. Those types of Libertarian Party too. Turning Point USA to a lesser degree too. CPAC, CPAC's hypocrisy on tone is clear in light of its inclusion of radical LGBT group Log Cabin Republicans for a third year in a row. Log Cabin Republicans are known for saying that people who defend real marriage are losers and morons, and they say bad things about Milo Yiannopoulos, even though he is gay, because he's anti-transgender. And meanwhile,
low-tax SJWs.
Yeah, they're low. That's the perfect way to describe them. The conservative movement is being taken over by what is essentially low-tax SJWs.
And what's really sad is what's happening to the social conservatives now. I mean, I can see a danger of like the kind of social conservatives being taken over by the alt-right, and alt-right sort of gobbling that whole section up.
And that's what I said I saw as the real threat. But
I'm not perhaps maybe as worried about that as you two are. If social conservatism can if it can affect whatever that, because whatever social conservatism goes forward is going to be called alt-right. Let's just face that. You, me, everybody in this stream, as far as the establishment concerned, is alt-right.
Well,
so
I mean, like,
here's the thing.
Racist,
Well, here's
the
thing.
I know that.
I think the best way to put it.
There needs to be a reset about our focus on that it's okay to be white. I mean, there needs to be a reset that there is an America, and that it's a collection of races, but America isn't made up of people from India. It has some people who are Indian in it. It's not made up of people who are from Japan. It's not even made up of people who are from New Zealand. that's a thing, and it might change in the future, and that could be okay. But to try
That's
to
a whole other
forcibly
topic.
change it,
We do
Yeah.
have to push back against the anti-white stuff coming from the left, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
I think that social conservatism in the in the sense you're pro-life, you're for family values and so forth. I really think that stands above identity politics, because we
Definitely.
don't want black babies to be aborted any more than white babies. We want to save all the babies.
right?
We don't want white people to have successful families that build wealth and help their children, and not have not have that for blacks and for everyone else too. I mean, I'm all for securing a future for white children. I'm just not against securing a future for all the other children too.
But a coherent immigration policy has always been a part of social conservatism. It doesn't have to be explicitly racialist. It doesn't have to be.
That's true. That's true. You're right. I mean,
that is a component of what social conservatism is. It also is a component of how you maintain communities on the ground level. You can't flood local communities with immigrants from other countries and think that you're going to have a cohesive social community in your neighborhood or my neighborhood.
You can have an organized influx of some immigrants, but it has to be a number that we can absorb.
And it also is important that, like, they're Christians. Like, I live in Michigan here, and we have a large Lebanese population that we've had for about 100 years now. But those are Christian Lebanese, and that's a big difference than the Muslims moving into Dearborn, for example.
Oh, definitely. I would say that a policy that takes into account an immigration policy that really takes into account religion is what is needed.
Here's
sure.
the thing. Yeah. Here's the thing too. I want to add this too, is that what I see for the danger of social conservatism is that it'll become a slave of another ideology. Because only in the conservative coalition was it an equal partner where both were important. But it'll become a slave to the alt-right. It'll become a slave to some other ideology.
No, the alt-right.
I think you're right. I think that is a serious danger.
Well, yeah. I don't think the alt-right cares about social conservatism, and I don't think they want social conservatives to be part of their movement. And the reason why is, if you look at a lot of these people, Greg Johnson, The Right Stuff, Richard Spencer, these people aren't social conservatives at all. Yeah. I mean, putting aside if you put aside their racialist views, they're all pro homosexuality. They're pro choice. They're just they have no. I mean, Richard Spencer just wants everything the left does, but for white people. But for white people, and that is a major problem. The alt-right is basically made up of pro-white liberals. They're just that.
I'm thinking more of like the Fuentes. Where that white? That's the name. That
Fuentes.
Yeah, that crazy high-pitched voice guy.
I feel like we're trying to get off track here. The thing is, the alt-right. We've talked about the alt-right. Those who are the leaders of the alt-right right now, I don't think are going to be the leaders of what the alt-right becomes in, say, 10, 15 years.
Definitely.
There's going to be a move a little bit more towards the mainstream. If the alt-right is going to continue to be on the ascendancy, at some point it's going to moderate. And when it moderates, it's still going to have a racialist focus, but it's going to find various ways to make that racialist focus more socially acceptable. And
so you think it's going to be more social liberal? It's going to throw
and that's I see that as dangerous, because there's two things it could do. One is it could replace traditionalist social conservatism with racialism. Just quite simply say, this is the new Republican stance on social issues. Deal with it. And
so there's going to
the pro-life, family values, social conservatives will simply not have a party anymore. Essentially, that's possibility number one. That's a danger. The second danger is that they will vacuum up the social conservative issues and will carry them forward better than the existing social conservatives do, and will use them to make their racialism more palatable. That's less likely, but possibly even more dangerous.
Well, like to be pro-life will be the same as to be pro-white.
But it already is. I'm sorry. We have to, I know this is a normie stream. I know it's all about normie conservatism, but we have to read the writing on the wall here.
I know. That's why I say it's dead. I mean, I'm not a positive.
But we have to stop caring about what they're going to call us. We have to.
No, I'm not talking about what they're going to call us. I understand that they're going to call us whatever shit they want to call us.
I'm talking about guys.
I'm talking about where political philosophy in America is going to go, and
guys.
And
regardless,
which groups are going to have power in the Republican Party?
Guys, right now, all of us on this stream, we are far right. We are all far right in today's political circles. Yeah. Even if our views were like mainstream conservatism of 10, 15 years ago, we are now.
Mine kind of are pretty much.
Yeah,
so
we are basically the new face of the far right.
That's why I mean.
When leftists start talking, and leftists control the press, so whenever the press starts talking, anyone to the right of BuzzFeed is far right. So, that doesn't really tell us much. But in terms of political philosophy, looking at it seriously, no, we're really not far right.
So the other thing I wanted to add was that, yes, so we're concerned that racialism could somehow be used as a better way to get votes than pro-life. But we, as social conservatives, need to speak to the issues that are facing the country. And right now, abortion's a big deal, but it's invisible. And the risk is that if you actually want to meet this rising threat of alt-rightism, the way you need to do it is you need to speak to those issues more effectively than the alt-right is. You can't just help them and say, well, those are racialist issues for dirty alt-righters who, the way Ben Shapiro dismisses them. You have to actually realize there's a real threat that Americans who are Americans today could be displaced. There's a real threat what's going on in Europe.
Yeah, I agree. But the thing is, and you said it yourself in your example, that the problem, and this is kind of like it's this. The problem is culture, not race. The problem is religion, not race.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's going to be a distinction that we have to always make. That's like that. Otherwise, I mean, I don't give a shit what the left calls us. They're just a bunch of scumbags. What I care about is my principles and the principles I want to teach. I want to hold up to. And I don't want to like.
Is racism isn't the only sin. So right now, in previous generations, like you guys were talking about how King's words became part of conservative orthodoxy, and so then to not be racist was important. It was more important. We may be coming into an age where not being racist, a negative value, isn't really good enough anymore. We need to be more positive something else. And the first time, and as that starts to take shape, because it's not leftist, the first thing they're going to do is call it racist. And we have to filter out that distort. And I'm asking a really hard thing here. But
no, I mean, I'm always
I mean, we're not racist has always been it's always been a dumb thing to say.
Yes.
We're not racist.
It's always been
because it's like saying I'm not a witch.
Or I'm not a pedophile.
I'm not a witch, or I'm not a pedophile. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you even have to say that already paints you as having something to hide or being guilty or whatever. So to the extent that conservatives have done that, it's been a bad strategy. However, it's one thing to say it's a bad rhetorical strategy, and another to say that it's a bad political philosophy.
Yeah,
No, what I'm saying is that we need to believe in something. So when King was espousing the morality of changing certain policies to end segregation, he was believing, at least hopefully, he was believing in something bigger than just not being segregation. He was believing in a positive ideal that was bigger than the negative thing he was trying to get rid of. And we're up against full-throated deconstructionists who don't believe in anything, and they're just tearing everything down. So as we move forward, we're transitioning where messaging needs to move away from being not racist to being something more positive, maybe pro-American, maybe American first. But
for me, Granger, for me, I'm like a burned out case of myself. I don't really care about politics anymore. I'm so burned out about it. But if I was passionate about it again, what I would care about would be the same thing that I cared about when I was 20. It wouldn't change. I have no reason to change. I would care about the conservative coalition, the fusionists. That's what I still haven't changed. That's why I call myself a normie, because I haven't changed. And I'm not going to. And I think that's a temptation to change. That's what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to change what I have. I don't think there's anything wrong with what I had.
But
does that make sense?
So conservatism is the rejection of ideology, because ideology grabs onto one particular value and it just sort of rides that to death. And it also sort of freezes it in time.
Wait. Say that again. What?
Conservatism is rejection of ideology.
Yes.
Okay, I disagree with that.
Yeah.
No. Let me talk about this. This is an important distinction I think conservatives need to make. Ideology is not a metaphysical belief.
Right.
Okay. The ideology was invented in the Enlightenment, and it's basically like this system that uses all this jargon, and
it's an ideal. So it's us projecting our ideal onto the metaphysical instead of the transcendent moral order intersecting our reality and us living that out. It's the causality is backwards from what it should be. So
that's it.
Well,
that is...
I have an important terminological argument to make against this. I've read what the argument that you're making in several conservative writers. I just think that the way that this is defining ideology is somewhat disingenuous.
Well, then what word would you prefer to use?
The etymology of the word ideology just means system of ideas. And
that's how.
Well, feminism just means equality for women.
Thomism is a system of ideas, a system of philosophical ideas. Thomism,
Platonism.
Platonism.
Those are metaphysical beliefs. Those are metaphysical beliefs. Those are ideas about
in terms of epistemology, they're all ideologies.
But
I agree with Ben, but I think that we're kind of getting stuck on this.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Well,
I brought it up to point out that, because Normie was saying that he hadn't changed, and I understand what he's trying to get at. He's trying to say that this is what he cares about, and this is what he wants to move forward. But I'm saying that society changes. I'm not trying to reinvent the idea of progress, but morality is refined. Slavery is illegal now, and for most of human history, it wasn't. That's a moral development. So moral development is occurring across time, I believe, in Christendom, because God's actively doing that. And conservatism is this idea that hopefully, or a set of ideas, hopefully, that flows from those metaphysical truths and then tries to live them out in the world. And which ideas we need or get to work on in a particular time changes. It doesn't mean that we suddenly give up on certain ideas or that certain things that were true in the past aren't true anymore. It's just that society's here now. How can we push forward from this position? And then we'll be in a new position in 10 years, and then society's in that position. How do we push forward from there?
Yeah, I think maybe a better term might actually be invented ideology as opposed to natural law.
Okay, fair enough.
So C.S. Lewis makes this distinction in The Abolition of Man.
But he uses the word ideology too. So
let him finish.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Let me come back in about 30 seconds with the quote when I find it. All right.
Okay. Yeah. So, moving forward, I mean, like, if what's going to replace? I think the key question is what's going to replace this conservative coalition? Is there any chance it can be reestablished? And I just want to point out too, also, is that when we think about this, we have to remember that it's still true that this coalition was the most effective enemy of the left for the last 50 years. I mean,
Absolutely.
it wasn't perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
I think
it
that
had many victories.
Yeah, this is. I think that's what the alt-right doesn't seem to understand. They seem to think that, quote unquote, normie conservatism lost all the time, but I don't think that was true up until really the Bush years.
Well, look at the victories. We're not communist. We don't even have single-payer health care in America. We didn't. The world didn't get blown up.
We still have our guns.
We still have our guns.
We still have our
Not-
guns. That's not to be underestimated.
Yeah,
We still
not
have
a
the
joke,
electoral
man.
college. I mean,
Yeah, awesome. I love the electoral college. I'm sorry. It's just,
Well-
otherwise there's just be Manhattan. It'd just be Manhattan.
I
California.
think. Well, here's the. It's just that I think that the problem was normie conservatism did not focus enough on
I found the quote, you guys.
colleges, the academics and cultural. If normie conservatism would have incorporated more of like the culture war idea of like Pat Buchanan post Cold War, rather than rather than the neocons trying to find a new enemy, then that would have been better. And I think that's where we need to go back. To, and I think the best way to do that is to emphasize religious freedom and social conservatism as the ideals. And I think people like John Zmirak pointed out in a recent article that the Supreme Court has just made a decision saying that to tie in back to Martin Luther King, homosexuality is now a protected class under anti-discrimination law, according to the current Supreme Court. And that means that if this is true, that means Christianity is effectively illegal in America.
Wait. Which decision are you talking about?
Well,
I mean, they didn't come out with the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision yet, did they?
Read this. According to a report from BuzzFeed, a federal appeals report.
Surely the most credible source you could have found.
A federal appeals court on Monday ruled that a 1964 civil rights law bans anti-gay workplace discrimination. The decision rebukes the Trump administration, which had argued that against a gay worker in the case, and hands progressives a win in their strategy to protect LGBT employees with the drumbeat of lawsuits. The dispute hinges on whether Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bans discrimination on the basis of sex, also bans workplace discrimination due to sexual orientation.
A federal appeals court, not the Supreme Court.
There's no way the Supreme Court isn't going to rule that Title VII applies to homosexuals. I can't see them, and the current court, I can't see them not totally accepting this. The thing is, though, Masterpiece Cake Shop is on the docket first, and the optics on that are really bad for the left.
But can't they just plead federalism? Can't SCOTUS and the Masterpiece Cake Shops just plead federalism and say that?
They might plead federalism on that, and then completely change on this where the optics are better.
Right.
I just want to comment on the fact
what they
that
did in Windsor, and then what they did in Oberfield. They literally pled federalism in Windsor, and then when they wanted to go rewrite it, they rewrote it in Windsor.
Yeah, they could do
here's
guys.
That's part of the problem with the current American political system. All of the power is in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can do whatever it wants. Period.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want. I think the federalism will only be restored when somebody just stands up, just defies the Supreme Court. Says, like some governor says, "No, I'm not doing that. You don't have the power to do that." No, it's come to that point. I mean, I hate the Supreme Court so much.
We're
Makes me so angry because
at
there's
some
no
point there's going to
check on
have
their
to
power.
be some kind of confrontation with the Supreme Court. They are out of control, and it doesn't matter how many elections we win. We are never going to fix anything until we get the court under control. Nothing else matters.
Exactly. I must have missed the part in the Federalist Papers where they said, "Oh yeah, the court has godlike powers over everything. If they want to."
Well, I think that was established in like one of the first major Supreme Court cases, Marbury versus Madison.
Yeah.
Well, that was judicial review. That wasn't unlimited godlike powers.
Just because you have some judicial review
Exactly.
does not mean you can do whatever you want.
Here's where I get to posit one of my political pet causes. Ron Paul had this idea. It was called the We the People Act, and it was the idea that we could use federal legislation to limit the scope of the court. So he was going to limit the scope of the court. He was going to say that the court couldn't rule on state marriage laws, it couldn't rule on abortion, and it couldn't.
What the fuck does it can do around state marriage laws? Oh my god, such a disgrace, absolute disgrace. I was more
yes, but you could legislate it. The president and the you can limit the scope of the court, legislatively. And
the Supreme Court can just strike that law down as unconstitutional based on previous existing case law.
Then what you do is you need a Trump to do this. You need to say, they've made their decision, let them enforce it. Who's the police? Who's gonna?
The thing is, though, I mean, we're not going to win every presidential election, and as soon as we get one president who will enforce it, it'll be enforced, and that'll be the new normal.
It's ridiculous.
And I think you could have a president that could enforce a law to limit the scope of the court.
Yeah, but he can only limit the scope of the court during his term in office, which is only going to be 4 years.
The bottom line is the Supreme Court's law is a veneer of legitimacy when it's actually completely illegitimate at this point. The decisions they have made recently have nothing to do with the separation of powers. I mean, like,
I'd say they've been that way since at least 1965.
Because they feel sorry for gay children, and all of a sudden now you can't say marriage between a man and woman. What the fuck does that mean? Oh my god!
Well, try to keep your language.
I'm sorry.
Catholics get riled.
Try to watch your language, please.
I apologize. There's actually
I have little brothers and stuff who watch these live streams.
I'm sorry, Ben. I apologize.
I might say I had this quote from C.S. Lewis about the difference between the conservative idea of moral advance and the invented ideology stance. He's trying to answer the charge that moral traditionalism doesn't admit any kind of moral advance. He says that there's a certain kind of moral advance that it will admit. Right. He says this, quote, "There is a difference between a real moral advance and a mere innovation. From the Confucian, do not do to others what you would not like them to do to you, to the Christian, do as you would be done by, is a real advance. The morality of Nietzsche is a mere innovation. The first is an advance, because no one who did not admit the validity of the old maxim could see reason for accepting the new one, and anyone who accepted the old would at once recognize the new as an extension of the same principle. If he rejected it, he would have to reject it as a superfluity, something that went too far, not as something simply heterogeneous from his own ideas of value. But the Nietzschean ethic can be accepted only if we are ready to scrap traditional morals as a mere error, and then to put ourselves in a position where we can find no ground for any value judgments at all. It is the difference between a man who says to us, 'You like your vegetables moderately fresh. Why not grow your own and have them perfectly fresh?' and a man who says, 'Throw away that loaf and try eating bricks and centipedes instead.'"
The radical break, yeah.
This quote applies to what we're talking about on at least two different levels, probably more. It applies to the difference between natural law-based ideology and invented ideology, what you'd call ideology and whatever you had for the other category.
Metaphysical truths.
Metaphysical truths versus ideology, and I'd say natural law ideology versus invented ideology, just because of the terminological disagreement. But anyway, it applies to that. but it also applies to what the Supreme Court is doing to the Constitution and to law and to the whole concept of written law in general.
Yep.
They are throwing away the loaf and giving us bricks and centipedes instead, and then defending the bricks and centipedes as an interpretation of the loaf.
And so we've either got to have secession or we've got to have some sort of way to limit the court's power through legislation or something. I mean, I'm open to hearing other ideas, but
I'm not entirely sure what to do other than to stack the bench with conservative activist justices.
Yeah, I mean, that's what really burned me out of politics anyway. It seemed like no matter what we did, I mean, for the gay marriage thing, like we won every election when it was a referendum. We won almost every one.
We won Proposition 8.
Yeah, in California. So
thank you, Mormon.
California of all places.
Yeah, it's not like it was
every leftist who says that they are defending democracy and voting is lying. They are all liars. None of them believe in democracy and voting.
And add to that, everyone that says I don't know that everyone is in favor of gay marriage, no one has a problem with it. Well, then explain to me why it never won an election.
Well, it won twice. Yeah, very narrowly in very blue states.
Exactly. So I got this big argument with Distributus once on Twitter because I got really angry with him because he was like, "It doesn't matter. None of that matters anymore. Don't even talk about it anymore." I'm like, "Well, no, it matters."
In fairness to Distributus, I think we probably either live in red states. I don't know where Buckley's from, but
I'm from Texas.
Okay, so everybody here is either in a red state or a battleground state, and Distributus is over there in cuckoo liberal land, and
that I think affects how he views a lot of this stuff.
And I don't blame him because I mean that is a hard pill to swallow. I mean, and then he's an academic.
Also, though, how people see the past, especially the recent past, fundamentally informs how they see what they're doing now and what they're going to do in the future. It just fundamentally informs, and so it's not enough to just understand like the history of the American Revolution and the history of like the Civil War and so forth. You have to understand this recent history too, because if you don't, then basically the left gets to define it for us for one thing.
And here's where the alt-right is correct. Like we were talking about how we lost the Supreme Court, and then that suddenly makes every one of our electoral victories worthless. The alt-right is willing to break out of what Fritz would call the treaty of liberalism. They're willing to break out of that, and they're willing to consider extreme ends. And we have to be careful, but we have to consider those things.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have to consider extremism. Just what kind? No, I have an idea. Let me just get this out really quick. I have this idea that the gay marriage decision made everyone on the right a little bit crazy. I know it made me a little crazy. Just made me a little bit. I don't know what to do anymore. I've thrown off kilter because like I really cared passionately about that fight, and all of a sudden it was just taken away. Just like we don't care. Just as Kennedy felt like it, we don't like it. Doesn't matter. And that kind of, I think, after that Trump being elected, wasn't that it seems like something went off kilter at that moment. It's just like an intuition I have, and I don't know if it's true, but that's the way I felt personally.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I don't have a problem with if gays or whatever, they want to have like a mock wedding or whatever, they want to have certain legal privileges or whatever. That I don't see that as a big deal.
That's sacrilegious.
It was a redefinition of marriage. That was the
essential thing. The redefinition of marriage. That's the problem.
Exactly. I never cared about that.
And it's not just an abstract terminological issue. The Masterpiece Cake Shop case shows that it is an existential threat to religious freedom in America.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And it's also a threat to the idea of, I mean, this entire thing with it also calls into question the entire concept of anti-discrimination laws. I think that was something that conservatives were wrong to just accept as is the anti-discrimination laws, because I have
to admit you've got a point there, and I want to say something here. Dr. King's philosophy that I quoted, the natural law philosophy, does not necessarily justify every single provision of the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
We have to
You can be right
separate
on one thing.
what's actually in the Civil Rights Act from these principles.
Yeah,
There's a difference
absolutely.
between the Civil Rights Act and these principles. And if we can make that distinction, then I'm certainly open to, trying to look at problems with the Civil Rights Act. And I'd like to even have another live stream on that at some point.
I think the
But
first
I
problem is the
don't
name.
think we have enough time tonight to go
Yeah.
over the whole Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, the name is a little bit misleading, and to be honest, because it's really about that's a different story, like you said.
Yeah, well, it's been about 2 hours at this point, so I think we're about ready to start winding down. And I think we've gotten to most of the things I really wanted us to hit on tonight.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we could come in next time and we could discuss like some positive ideas for a conservative movement. What that would look like and what kind of policies that they would try to implement.
Yeah.
It might be a good idea to talk about the whole idea of identity politics on the right.
Yes, I want to talk about. I would like to trace the history of identity politics in American culture. To be honest, I think that'd be very good.
I would probably be bored by that. I would
well,
rather.
I think the John Birch Society, how like what Buckley did back then.
I typed the John Birch Society into Google while we were talking about an hour and a half ago because I thought about bringing it up, but then I thought, nah, we don't really have time to go over that right now. But
I was wondering if you were going to
about
bring that up. You kept talking about Buckley pushing out different groups of conservatives. Were you hinting at the John Birch Society? Is that
I was thinking of discussing that, but I thought that would be a little bit too much detail, and the John Birch Society issue is complicated.
Yeah.
And also,
so I decided to simplify it out of my narrative, but it would need to be discussed, to really do the subject justice.
And also, it's a way. I think it's a key feature of American conservatives as opposed to like say European conservatism. I mean, like I really think that's an important distinction we could talk about and explore.
Yeah.
It's something that's unique about American conservatives compared to, like, say, I don't know, English conservatives. Maybe.
Can I give a closing statement, I guess?
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to get us to is our closing statements. So
my main thing would be that because I sort of went through this too myself. I remember my libertarianish phase. I never abandoned social conservatism, but my brief phase where I thought all problems could be solved with political liberty. I remember hating Reagan because he didn't do enough to balance the budget. And one of the things I realized was that was a thing that he should have done. It would have been nice if he could have done it. But it wasn't one of the issues that he faced. He faced Russia. He faced communism. He faced he faced a broken economy, and he got the economy back on track. Out of the Reagan movement came welfare reform. Not only did communism not take over America, but it also fell in almost all other parts of the world, and it's even very different in China from what it was. So to look back at Reagan and just think, oh, failure because he didn't hit this arbitrary libertarian benchmark, really isn't a reflection of his failure. It's more of a reflection of I wanted him to solve what's now my generation's problem. So to alt-right thinkers or 16-year-old kids who embrace these radical ideas, I would more say that if you have to look at the context of what American conservatism was in its time, and it solved those problems. It had a huge cultural impact. Now, it did lose a lot of battles, and it's been decimated in these last few years, but you can't just... There are challenges that young people today and people our age have to face, and that's what we have to figure out.
I'd like to make a closing statement next, if I may. One of the things that I would like to, one of the other reasons that just building on what Granger just said, one of the reasons that the coalition failed was a lack of charity to each other, and I see that a lot. I see I see different people in the conservative movement just not just demonizing the left, justly so, but demonizing each other, and the differences being like you are the enemy, the fracturing there. And if there ever is a hope of coalition again, we have to view each other as somewhat as human beings. Like we don't agree on everything. And for me, I am my primary passion has always been social conservatism. I mean, kind of like I never. That's and so for me, like I have to acknowledge the importance of the other legs on the stool, and the same has to be done for you and for you. Like I'm talking to the other people on that stool, because if we're ever going to build a coalition again, we're going to have to start like just agreeing on things and agreeing to work together, and not like you're a sellout, you're a fanatic, etc.
Well, I think that finding policy ideas that will bring together a wide coalition that won't be anti-traditionalist is key. We need. I think if distributors talked about this about CPAC with me, and they said, okay, what the reason why CPAC is just going full libertarian SJW is because they are basically what probably happened was a bunch of boomers were sitting around at a desk with a few millennial quote unquote conservatives. And the millennials were like, "Hey guys, we need to ban these groups and get all this gay and transgender stuff here. Otherwise, otherwise we won't be relevant." And the boomers were like, "Oh my gosh, we need to be relevant with what the kids are doing nowadays." We laugh, but that's exactly what happened, probably. And if you look and see and the reason why is that a lot of millennial conservatives are just libertarian SJWs. And the solution if there had been at least one person sitting down at that table, one person had said, hey guys, social conservatism actually matters, then we would have seen something different. But until social conservatives need to demand a seat at the table, because otherwise they're going to be subsumed by whatever group takes over the conservative movement. That's my closing thoughts.
So, are we missing somebody's closing thoughts? I get the last word because it's my channel. So,
I think we've all gone now.
all right. So I'm going to something I've thought of doing since before we started doing this stream. I thought about a closing remarks that quote Lincoln, and I know some of you don't like Lincoln, but
I have mixed views.
Whether you
like
whether you like Lincoln or not, Lincoln was the first great Republican president, and he campaigned on fighting against what was at the time a very threatening, growing evil, the evil of slavery, which was the advocates of which were trying to spread it into the territories and then ultimately throughout the whole country. And I think what Lincoln has to say here about slavery definitely applies to abortion, to the promotion of adultery and fornication to our children that we're fighting against on the homosexuality issue, the eventual advocacy of pedophilia, which is coming. These are the things we're fighting against, and I think Lincoln's words on this, they apply there just as they did to slavery. He said, I'm trying to decide how early to start here. He said, holding as they do that slavery is morally right and socially elevating, they cannot cease to demand a full national recognition of it as a legal right and a social blessing. Nor can we justifiably withhold this on any ground save our conviction that slavery is wrong. Note, what he's saying here is that only the conviction that slavery is actually morally wrong can justify our denying slavery, because if we just based it on social utility, that would not be sufficient. You see, he's saying it has to be more than just social utility. It has to be moral, the argument from moral right and wrong, from what you described earlier as metaphysical truths. He says, if slavery is right, all words, acts, laws, and constitutions against it are themselves wrong and should be silenced and swept away. If it is right, we cannot justly object to its rationality, or its nationality being made national, its universality. If it is wrong, they cannot justly insist upon its extension, its enlargement. All they ask, we could readily grant if we thought slavery right. All we ask, they could as readily grant if they thought it wrong. Their thinking it right and our thinking it wrong is the precise fact upon which depends the whole controversy. Thinking it right as they do, they are not to blame for desiring its full recognition as being right, but thinking it wrong as we do, can we yield to them? Can we cast our votes with their view and against our own? In the view of our moral, social, and political responsibilities, can we do this? Wrong as we think slavery is, we can yet afford to let it alone where it is, because that much is due to the necessity arising from its actual presence in the nation. But can we, while our votes would prevent it, allow it to spread into the national territories and to overrun us here in these free states? If our sense of duty forbids this, then let us stand by our duty fearlessly and effectively. Let us be diverted by none of those sophistical contrivances wherewith we are so industriously plied and belabored. Contrivances such as groping for some middle ground between the right and the wrong, vain as the search for a man who should be neither a living man nor a dead man, such as a policy of don't care on a question about which all true men do care. And then I'm skipping down here. Neither let us be slandered from our duty by false accusations against us, nor frightened from it by menaces of destruction to the government, nor of dungeons to ourselves. Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it. And if that's not the spirit of conservatism, I can't say what is.
I was gonna say amen, but then someone would would accuse me of worshiping Lincoln or something. But yeah, amen.
All right. Well, I think I'm gonna let us go now, and hopefully we can offline talk about when our next stream might be. But thank you very much, Buckley, Granger, and Normie for participating. I'll send me the link to your email me a link to your channel so I can put it in the description of this. And thanks very much, everyone, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.